Hello and welcome to Haul Around the World presented by Crushing Comics. I'm your host, Crisis with a K, and I'm coming to you from my home in Wellington, New Zealand, where I am surrounded by a massive comic book collection that I hauled around the world back in 2017 when I moved to Wellington from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in the United States. But now, when I want to add new books to this collection, I also have to haul those books around the world because there are not a lot of people to get comics from directly here in New Zealand. So I'm here to talk about a haul around the world from 2020. I'm catching up on some things that have been laying about that I haven't talked about, and it includes a number of epic collections, which we will get into, and one Marvel Masterwork, which we will get into. But before we do, I want to talk a little bit about why I'm not buying these things in New Zealand and why they're even hauls around the world and the state of buying new collections as the year of 2020 wore on. The way this all works, especially Marvel, because I'm mostly hauling Marvel books, is that Marvel fulfills some books to the direct market and they fulfill some books to the book market. And the books that the direct market get come through Diamond, and Diamond supplies them. Even if I had a comic book store here that I was going to, chances are they are probably ordering their books from Diamond and through some other distributor, and they're coming here. Whereas if I get books from a bookstore here in New Zealand or anywhere else in the world, they are almost certainly not ordering Marvel books from Diamond because Marvel has a bookstore distributor. Something that was happening last year with books, collected editions from Marvel, especially in the middle of the year, is that they were selling out really, really quickly at the places that we're all used to getting them in the direct market, and then they weren't even necessarily showing up in the book market. And that was creating panic among those of us who really keep up with things like epic collections. So this epic collection, Captain America, Monsters and Men, it was in stock for like a couple of weeks, and then it disappeared everywhere. And I don't even think the book market had had it at that point. And so the few places that had it, that were selling it, that still had it, the price went up, and it really got into like a price escalation situation. And it wasn't just with this book. So I have no insider knowledge. I am watching the same channels and things that you are, like Near Mint Condition, to find out about this. And what I gleaned over the course of the years, that a few things were happening that was causing that at once, right? There was one thing happening, which was that Marvel had done a little bit of short printing on some books for very valid reasons. Another thing that was happening was that not all shipments were getting to all of the places all at the same time. And another thing was happening that was the book market, which is getting books to sell later than the normal 2-week gap after they would get the books, typically after the direct market gets those books. But all of those things together, and not just for Marvel, was creating a situation where books were selling out in a flash. So something I normally do, because I have to haul the books around the world, is I will wait for some books to accumulate in my order. And I order usually from in-stock trades. And once the book order gets heavy enough that it's worthwhile for me to get it hauled around the world, I will pull the trigger. And sometimes that all happens in 1 week, but usually it's like every 3 weeks or every 5 weeks, because I'm pretty much at this point only buying epic collections, a limited number of Marvel Masterworks lines, big X-Men hardcovers, and then occasional indie books. But I really don't get that much physical collected stuff anymore. I mostly read and buy in digital. And what happened was, as I was waiting for my cart to fill, and I remember I had these 2 books in the cart, they went out of stock. And then I thought, oh, well, maybe I can get them somewhere else. And I started looking, and there was nowhere else to get them. So that's when I actually started looking in New Zealand. I'm like, well, maybe some copies made their way to New Zealand, and they hadn't. Because for the book market here to get them, it's probably going to be after the book market everywhere else. So at one point, I did actually find a copy of this book in New Zealand. I was like, great, I'm going to get it. But then we have to deal with how much that costs in New Zealand compared to elsewhere in the world. So the exchange rate today is not what it was over the last year. Actually, it's really changed over the past couple of months, even the past couple of weeks. But today, this book, which is $39.99 US, would be $57.41 in New Zealand. So that, it's the same money, right? It's $39 I would spend in the US, $57 I would spend here. But that's not how much the books are sold for here if you get them from someone in New Zealand. Usually they're at least 2 times their US cover price. So this would typically be at least $80 New Zealand. And that's to deal with GST, which is the tax that we get charged as consumers, as well as import taxes that companies have bringing it in, as well as the exchange rate, as well as their profit margin. But it's actually even more common for books to be more than 2 times their US cover price, which is way different than the conversion rate of our currencies. Every so often, if I really can't get something or I'm worried I'm not going to get something from the US, I will bite the bullet and I will buy it in New Zealand. But it's only happened about 3 times since we have been here because it's just so much more money in absolute terms. It's not like more New Zealand dollars than more US dollars, more money, no matter what currency we transfer it to. So I was thinking about that, and finally I waited and waited, and these books came back into stock, and I made two big decisions. One was I was placing this order at that very moment, and the other was that I was going to switch over to actually pre-ordering from Direct Comic Book Service, which is owned by the same people of IST, for future books, because the stress and the tracking things down and the having 18 different tabs open, it just wasn't worth it. I don't want to be in that life. If I could just hit a subscribe button and have all the Epic Collection sent to me, I would. So I will talk more about my DCBS adventures in a subsequent episode, but now let's finally get to the books, right? That's why you're here, the books. Or maybe you're here to listen to my charming conversationalism. I don't know. So here's Captain America. It's called Captain America, Monsters and Men. It is volume number 10 of the Epic Collection. It collects from 1982 to 1983, issues 267 through 285, Annual 6, and appearance in Defenders 106. So this is prior to Grunwald's run on Captain America, which starts in the single digits of the 300s. This is primarily written by J.M. DeMatteis, and something in it is written by David Anthony Kraft. Now, I have no knowledge of this material. I have some knowledge of Captain America in the Kirby era. I have a certain amount of knowledge of Captain America in the Grunwald era. I don't know a darn thing about this. Paging through it, it's got some Falcon stuff. And actually, I recognize some of these Falcon stories from working on my Falcon guide, because at that point I did page through all of his appearances ever, especially, I don't know what issue we're in here, this Falcon backup. Let's see, where are we? Turn. We're in 276. Great, very cool cover there. And this has a Falcon backup story. And I remember reading this in specific when I was working on the Falcon guide on my site. This has got a really nice paper quality. The thing to think about with Epic Collections, and I'll be coming back to this as we talk more about Epics in my hauls, they're printed at a few different printers. And even though Marvel's asking for an equivalent paper from all those printers, it's not always the same paper. It might be in the same paper family, it might have the same finish, be a similar weight, but not every criteria is all the same. It might be the same weight, but a slightly different finish because it's by a different manufacturer. It might be the same weight, but it might be a slightly different white brightness. So not all paper is created the same. This is pleasing though. It holds color really well. There's some really saturated pages in here that I've been through, especially these covers with all of their yellow, and it looks really nice. And then the other thing that I always look for, and you should too when you get a book, is to find a page that has a lot of white on it, which I'm trying to find one, to see how much shows through. Here's a great example. So if I get right up on this page, can I just see the page behind it? I can see a little bit here at the bottom because it's clearly backed with black. You can even see on camera a little bit of that shadow. But I don't see that much show through on the page itself. I see like a little hint of a line. It's because I find that distracting. And even as I start to turn the page, then I start to be able to see it. And you can even see it on camera as I start to turn the page, that you start to be able to see the page from the other side. And that's fine. I mean, unless you have super, super heavy paper, the way Marvel used to use in their omnibuses back in the day, that's okay. But this doesn't have so much show through to me that it's distracting. It's really well built. It seems glued well. It's nice and square along the spine. So let's see, where is this from? This was printed at, if you don't know this, you can look in the indicia of any book really, but especially collected editions will say it in the indicia. They not only will say what issues are contained in the collected edition, but also where and when it was printed. And this was manufactured between August and September of 2020 at LSC Communications. So, you know, the cover stock could be a little heavier, but I'm into this. This is decent. If they were all built like this, I would be totally okay with that. The next one in the stack is Silver Surfer. It is Silver Surfer Resurrection. It is volume 9. It's all from 1993. It contains Silver Surfer 76 through 85 and Annual 6, plus a Silver Surfer Warlock Resurrection miniseries 1 through 4, and Secret Defenders 9 through 10. Now, the thing to know about Silver Surfer's 1988 title is that it intersects with all three of the Infinity trilogy of events, partially because it's part of what set up the first one and kind of brought Thanos back and all of that. So there's Infinity Gauntlet, very famously, of course, then there's Infinity War, and then there's Infinity Crusade. In terms of where this epic collection fits, Infinity War hits issues 67 through 69 in Silver Surfer. This starts with 76, so it's a year after that. And Infinity Crusade hits issues 83 through 85 of Silver Surfer, which are in here. And the next issue of Silver Surfer, 86, is part of the Blood and Thunder crossover, which runs through Thor, Silver Surfer, and Warlock Chronicles, and Warlock and the Infinity Watch. And that has been collected in its own large collection, although that's pretty old. So at some point, they're going to have to decide if they're really going to recollect all of it in the next Silver Surfer Epic Collection or not. So that's all I really know about this. I'm not really educated in this part of Silver Surfer. At some point, I'm going to have to go and read it. But here's what I do know about 1993 and comic books in 1993. We're talking about some vivid, vivid colors. And we're not really, I don't think we'd be quite into the digital coloring era of Marvel, but this is a lot of ink on the page. And a comic from like the 80s or the 70s probably just wouldn't put quite this much black on the page, certainly not as much as this comic is, with the next page being so saturated, well, because the newsprint couldn't always hold that much color. So when you get books in the 90s like this, the colors, there's just so much more color and so much more brighter and vivid color compared to like what we saw in that Captain America book, which was from 1982 to 1983. This is a decade later. So I actually do have an expectation that for an Epic collection, you wouldn't necessarily want the same paper that you would want in an older Epic collection. So is this paper the same as the Cap paper? It might be. I think it's got a little bit more of a glossy finish to it, but the weight feels about the same. You can actually get your own tool to measure this called a calipers. I have them around somewhere, but paper is so thin that you need a caliper that goes down to the thousandths place if you really want to tell the difference in degrees between these two books. So let's see where this one was built. This was from LSC Communications between July and August of last year. So both of these books printed at the same place, LSC Communications, probably the same paperweight. There's two more in this pile. I don't have as much to say about them though. So this one is Avengers. It is Avengers Heavy Metal. It is volume 18 from 1987 to 89. It collects Avengers 286 through 303. And this is primarily written by Walter Simonson with Ralph Macchio and Mark Grunwald and Roger Stern. So this is not an Avengers period that I know a whole heck of a lot about. I actually start knowing a lot more about Avengers once we're into the 300s. So I will just take a look at how this is built and the paper quality. Here's a page with a lot of white. It does have a little bit of show through the other page. And I think this paper, I don't think this is the same paper as the other ones. Let's see where it was printed. This was printed at Sellouts printers between September and October. So this is not from the same printing press as the other ones. Paper, slightly different maybe? I think this is a little bit more matte and it might be a little bit more thin. So that's all I really have to say about this. Let's see if it has any extras. It collects an interview with Walt Simonson from Marvel Age, and it has an afterwards by Ralph Macchio. So that's cool that he wrote an afterword just for this epic volume. That's pretty neat. And that's this epic collection. So let's move on to my final epic collection in this group, which is Daredevil. Daredevil Last Rites. It is Epic Volume 15. It's from 1990 through 1992. It collects Daredevil 283 through 300 and Annual 7. I believe this is the end of Ann Nocenti and picking up the very beginning of Chichester taking over. I'm right. Let's take a look at the... Okay, this paper is different. This is a really matte finish, and it's much lighter. It takes this Blackwell, but it just feels much flimsier. And there's show through on this page. I'm sorry, I haven't really been showing the pages. There's show through on this page even through the black, which is crazy. To be able to see the opposite page through the black. Again, it's really awkward for me to try to show you that with the light shining on me. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it, but I can see it. This is not LSC. I'm willing to bet. It could be Sellouts. I would not be surprised if it's a third place. Let's see. This is Sellouts printers between September and October of last year. Is it the same paper as the Avengers? I think it's different, but wouldn't be able to say without calipers. So Daredevil. Again, I don't know an awful lot about this. I know Nocenti's run is looked upon really kindly. It had never been reprinted, really, before these epic collections, except for in like scattered random places like a issue of Daredevil and Inferno or something. So I'm actually really excited to have these epic collections and finally read it at some point. Daredevil is one of the characters I kind of favor a little bit more, certainly more than Silver Surfer. So that's probably higher in my to-read list. I really do think I'm going to at some point read every Marvel title sequentially through, but right now I'm in the middle of doing that for X-Men, and I'd probably do some of my other like major favorites like Fantastic Four. But Daredevil's pretty high on that list. Now I have one non-epic collection here, and that is a Marvel Masterworks. It is Marvel Masterworks 2-in-1, Marvel 2-in-1, numbers 47 through 60, and that is Marvel Masterworks Marvel 2-in-1 number 5. The reason I like to get this and Marvel Team Up is because it's for two reasons, actually. For this, it's because it's kind of a sister book to Fantastic Four. Thing is the anchor of Marvel 2-in-1. So I do have a complete collection of Fantastic Four and Marvel Masterworks, which I intend to finish collecting through the end of Byrne's run before I stop. So I wanted to have this too because it's a companion book. I also have Human Torch Marvel Masterworks because it was also a companion book. But I just really like the way that these team-up books from the 70s and 80s take slices of life from the rest of the Marvel universe, and you get to see all different other characters. You know, we have the Thing and Miss Marvel, the Thing and Quasar, Deathlock, Giant Man, Thundra, Wondar, the Aquarian, Impossible Man. It's a really fun trip around the Marvel universe, and there's something really fun for me about those issues. It's just not the same in the modern day, even with a team-up book, even with an anthology book, to get these little slices of all of the characters. Because a lot of times, these stories like really mattered. Like whatever, especially for a character who didn't have a book at the time, whatever they did in Marvel 2-in-1 or Marvel Team-Up would actually get referenced a lot the next time they appeared. So I just think it's fun connective tissue. Plus, there's no other good reprint of it. Maybe at some point we'll get an epic collection. Is there an epic collection? I'm like doubting myself now. If there is, it would be behind me somewhere. Marvel 2-in-1. There is a Marvel 2-in-1 epic collection, but not a Marvel Team-Up epic collection yet. So maybe we'll get this far in the epic collections as well. Let's see. Did they start at the beginning? They started at the beginning because it's a pretty old Marvel's Masterworks at this point. And just by comparison, because this is a slightly older epic collection, it is from 2018, also from LSC though. And yeah, its build quality is pretty similar to the LSCs we just had. After a while of like doing this on paper, you feel like you've just lost all of the touch on your hands, probably because you've picked up some little like paper dust and stuff, and it stops, I stopped being able to tell. So I've got to go like refresh my hands. But anyway, that is the haul of stuff that I still was having a little bit of FOMO about because, as I mentioned, those first couple books got really hard to find. So after this, we're going to get into some things that I started ordering way ahead of time from our friends at Direct Comic Book Service. I'm not sponsored in any way, although feel free to get to me for that because, oh boy, is it expensive to ship things to New Zealand. And before we get to my order ahead books, we are going to cover one more FOMO type of purchase in the next episode. And that will be this honker, the Power Pack Omnibus Classic Volume 1, which I cannot say I was only guilted into buying because of Zach Rabaroff, but Zach Rabaroff definitely helped to guilt me into buying it and for having fear of missing out. But you'll have to hear that story next time. So that's it for this haul around the world, covering 4 epic collections and 1 Marvel Masterworks, and we're still going through the hauls from 2020. Thank you so much for watching and listening to me ramble about these books. In this case, books I didn't know a whole lot about compared to X-Men books that I do. If you know a lot about one of these books, if they're one of your favorites, I'd love to hear that from you in the comments below. But until next time, thanks so much for watching, and I hope that you're well.